There's a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't demand attention the way rage does. It doesn't light fires or shatter windows. It, it just it just lingers. It's quiet, it's unrelenting. It's the pain of the unseen. It's the ache of being unwanted. It's the wound of being unchosen. And the world rarely talks about it. See, we're flooded with conversations about rejection in dating, or exclusion in social groups, or even job applications that go unanswered. But what's harder to name, and what few dare to admit, is how deeply that pain cuts when your existence itself seems to carry no magnetic pull for others. When no one picks you, when no one sees you, not just once, but over and over and over again. And for many people, especially men, this is the kind of wound that settles in early. Maybe it started off in the schoolyard when teams were picked and your name was always called last, or maybe not even called at all. Maybe it showed up in adolescence when you were watching your peers pair off into early romances while you stood on the sidelines. And perhaps it followed you into adulthood, where it takes the shape of being ghosted after say a vulnerable message was shared, or watching friend groups form tightly without you, or scrolling through dating apps where the matches never seem to land. And there's a unique kind of despair that builds when the world reflects back a message again and again, and that message is, you are not chosen. And here's the part that seems to be the hardest to name. When that wound goes unspoken or unacknowledged or unprocessed, it doesn't just disappear. It metastasizes, it hardens, and eventually it starts to whisper lies that sound a lot like the truth. They say things like, you're not chosen because you're not worthy, or you're not wanted because you're not lovable, or you're not seen because there's something wrong with you, or there's nothing special to see about you. And these are not just harmless thoughts. These are corrosive beliefs. They shape how you enter the room, how you hold your body, how you speak, or how you don't speak. It impacts how you offer yourself in relationships, and far worse, it shapes what it is that you think you deserve in this life. Now, this isn't just loneliness. It's really about identity, and it's about how we've come to understand our value when no one else is affirming it. And for far too many in our society, especially in male socialization, this pain becomes invisible because the only acceptable emotions that we're allowed to express are strength or stoicism or success. There's no space to actually name this wound. And so it doesn't get healed, it gets hidden. And you see, hidden wounds, they still bleed. So what we're talking about here is far deeper than just rejection. We're really dealing with an existential sense of invisibility, and it doesn't just affect those who are on the outside. Many people feel this in relationships. Some are surrounded by their friends and they still feel this sense of aloneness, because being included is not the same as being intimately known. Being praised isn't the same as being personally wanted. So let's strip away the noise and get to the center of this. There is a human need to be chosen, not just tolerated, not just acknowledged, not just picked, but desired and seen with soft eyes and held with intention. And when that need goes unmet, a soul starts to doubt its place in the world that it's in. Now let's name something else that's rarely talked about. For many men, especially those who resonate with the incel community or are on the edges of experiencing connection, The pain isn't just about not getting sex. It's about being seen as desirable at all. It's not as a friend, not as a partner, not even as a person that someone is curious about. It's almost like you're looked through. And over time, this builds a quiet sense of desperation. It's not the kind that you show per se, but the kind that builds in late night scrolls through social media, right? The kind that makes you mute your voice in conversations because you've convinced yourself that no one cares. It's the kind that watches other people live life with ease and starts to believe you were cursed with something that you can't quite name. We don't talk about that pain enough because it makes people feel uncomfortable, doesn't it? It doesn't fit easily into advocacy or slogans or wellness infographics. It's rather complex and it doesn't have a really quick fix. But if we don't talk about it, we're going to lose people to it. Some disappear into online forums where their ache is mirrored and amplified by others in a similar expression of pain. But instead of healing, they spiral deeper downwards. Some disappear into apathy or numbness or disconnection, whereas others just disappear into anger and rage. But some are quietly begging for a different story, a story where they don't have to earn the right to be loved through performance, a story where they aren't only measured by desirability, status, or even charisma. It's a story where intimacy is something they get to learn, not something they've forever been locked out of. So this podcast is for those people, for the ones who are tired of hiding their pain behind the humor of indifference, for the ones who feel like the world has moved on without them, and for the ones who have done the math and have decided that they simply don't add up. Here's the truth I want you to hear. You were never meant to be a background character in your own life. You were never meant to beg for scraps of attention. And you were never meant to build your identity around what others fail to recognize in you. You are not broken. And you can be whole. You're carrying a wound, and that wound deserves your attention. It deserves your care, not to indulge in self-pity per se, but to honor the truth of what's been lost, to make room for the healing, and in essence to reclaim your humanity. That's where we're going in this next section here. So I'd like to dive a little bit into what this kind of invisibility does to the psyche, how it twists our sense of worth, and how it often compels people to reach for coping strategies that often backfire, because until we see clearly what this wound does to us, we can't choose something different. But before we go there, I want to leave you with this. You are not the only one who feels this. You are not the only one who's tired. You aren't the only one who longs to be seen. You might feel like it, but you're not. And your longing isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to be honored. So stay with me just a little long here, because we're just getting started. I want to start here though. When the wound of being unchosen goes unaddressed, it doesn't stay still. It evolves and adapts and adapts in ways that are meant to protect, but often end up hurting you more. One of the first and most common adaptations is self-erasing. It's when people feel invisible long enough that they often begin to disappear into themselves preemptively. They stop showing up fully. They downplay their own desires. They make themselves small in the rooms where they already feel like they're overlooked. They tell themselves, well, what's the point? Or I'm just a burden anyway. So this shrinking doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like politeness. Sometimes it looks like detachment. Other times it looks like fake confidence. And yet underneath all of this, at the very core is this belief that says my presence does not matter here. And the tragedy of this belief is that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. See, the less we risk being seen, the less we're actually known. And the less we assert our value, the easier it becomes for others to ignore it. And the world doesn't stop to ask why someone's quiet. It just moves on. But the wound doesn't stop there. It actually goes on to mutate. If you live long enough in that space of rejection, one of two things usually happens. Either you begin to believe that you're the problem, or you decide at that point that the problem is everyone else. And that second pathway, the one where bitterness hardens into a worldview, this is where we often lose many men to an ideology. Because once someone has carried enough pain without language or validation, they start to reach for stories that can help explain and make sense of that pain. And this is where the incel thinking gains its power. It doesn't begin with hatred. It begins with heartbreak. It begins with someone looking for answers to why they feel so unworthy, and struggle with connection or even being recognized. And when the dominant culture fails to provide empathetic and grounded, honest answers, well, then extreme ideologies will happily step in and offer them. They offer a story, a logic, a villain. They'll say things like, she didn't pick you because women only want high status men. Or you're not getting attention primarily because the society is rigged against you from the very get-go. It'll say things like, you're suffering because you're not one of the genetically blessed individuals. And so these ideas give shape to the chaos, and they provide an illusion of sorts, an illusion of control, especially because if there's a reason you're unchosen, maybe there's a fix. But the fix that's offered isn't healing. It's a war against women, against culture, and against yourself. And slowly, the story shifts. No longer is the wound something that you're going to grieve. Instead, it becomes something to weaponize. And the pain of being unseen turns into performance of superiority, mocking the very people whose connection was once longed for, rejecting before even being rejected as a way to protect yourself. But underneath this armor, the original wound is still bleeding. And so we need to tell the truth. The incel worldview is not built on evil, it's built on pain, on chronic invalidation, on emotional malnutrition. But when we fail to name the pain honestly, it metastasizes into something cruel then, something that's cold and something that confuses power and worth with dominance and misses connection all along. So what can be done about this? Well, we can begin by telling a better story, a story where your pain is not proof that you are defective, a story where your longing does not need to be weaponized, a story where you can be real without being ridiculed. But to live that kind of a story, we have to unlearn some of the lies that we've adopted. Lies like you're only as valuable as your sexual desirability, or being wanted by someone else is the only proof that you're lovable, or your loneliness means that you're failing at life. Women or society at large owes you attention, the belief goes on to say. These are the lies that keep people trapped, and they make healing almost impossible, because if your entire sense of worth is outsourced to whether others find you attractive or interesting or useful, well, you'll never feel stable. You'll never feel safe. You'll always be chasing a moving target. But there's a truth waiting beneath those lies, though. And that is, you were not meant to be chosen as proof of your value. You were meant instead to know your value before you were ever chosen. That's where integrity begins. Not in pretending that you're fine when you're not. It's not in faking confidence, not in choosing to align with your external actions at the expense of the internal values, but aligning those two. You can say things like, I deserve respect even if I'm not desired. My story, you can go on to say, matters even when no one else has validated it yet. Or, I'm allowed to hurt, but I'm not obligated to harm. I am not disqualified from love because of past rejection. This is where the journey turns inward. Not inward into isolation, but into empowerment. Not in escapism, but in rebuilding. Not in blaming others, but in befriending the parts of yourself that were taught to see rejection as a mirror of your worth. The healing begins when we stop outsourcing our identity to people who never asked to carry it in the first place. It begins when we decide that being chosen is beautiful, but it's not required to be whole. It begins when we realize that our visibility isn't dependent on how many others see us, but instead on how willing we are to stop from hiding from ourselves. See, so many of us are walking around with these wounds that we were never allowed to name. And I'm not talking about the dramatic sort of breakdowns. I'm talking about the small daily dismissals that we experience and apply to ourselves. The time your voice was talked over, the text that went unanswered, the glance that skipped past you in a room. These tiny moments may seem insignificant, but as they accumulate, they start to build a story. So what I'm saying is this: you get to rewrite your story. And so I want to explore a little bit more what it means to move from survival to connection, and what it looks like to start showing up in a world where you're not begging to be seen, but you're showing up as someone who sees themselves clearly enough to invite real intimacy in. So we're going to unpack what wealthy connection looks like, rich kind of connection, a healthy kind of connection, which requires building emotional safety, and what it means to take risks that are both brave and have good boundaries as well. Because healing doesn't mean being chosen by everyone else. Healing means being fully available to the people who can choose you, because you've finally been able to choose yourself. So stay with me just a little bit here. So far, we've named the wound, we've traced its roots, and we've honored the ache of being overlooked and dismissed or chronically unchosen. And we consider the dangerous ways that it can warp our sense of self. But I want to shift now to what it looks like to rebuild. Because the only thing that's more painful than not being chosen is believing that you don't get to choose yourself. It's time that we reclaim that power. So let's start with a foundational truth, shall we? Let's start off by saying that you are allowed to be a safe place for yourself. Not as a consolation prize, but as your starting point, as your critical starting point. Too many of us have spent years hoping that someone else would come along and fix what was broken. or someone would rescue us from invisibility, or finally give us the validation that we've been hungering for years. But waiting to be seen is not the same as learning how to see yourself. And that means asking questions like, what do I actually like about myself, even if no one notices it? Or where do I feel most alive? Where do I feel most present? Where do I feel most grounded? What kind of person do I want to become, regardless of who's watching? These aren't self-help slogans. These are anchoring truths, and they can begin to help us make that shift from external validation to internal integrity. Because here's what happens when you start seeing yourself as worthwhile. You start becoming someone who others can actually see. Not because you're louder, not because you're faking your confidence, but it's because your presence, it can't be manufactured. It's felt. And when someone enters into a room and is grounded in their own sense of worth, and not arrogance, and not bravado or showmanship, but in a quiet stability, it changes the very feel of the air. You don't need to beg for attention because you actually embody it. But this isn't about becoming attractive in the conventional sense. No, this is about cultivating a life that reflects your internal values, a life that is rooted in integrity and in intimacy. See, the meaning of integrity is this. It means that your actions on the outside are a reflection and flow from the values on the inside. And intimacy means that you're allowing yourself to be seen courageously, not performatively, but more so honestly. And that's the antidote to chronic unchosenness. You stop performing to be chosen, and instead you become someone that's worth connecting with because you've stopped abandoning yourself. So let's get a little bit more practical just for a moment here, shall we? What does rebuilding connection look like after years of feeling unseen? Here are 5 starting points I want you to consider. Number 1, practice showing up in low-stake ways. You don't have to start with soul-bearing vulnerability. Instead, start by initiating a small conversation with someone. Offer maybe a sincere compliment. Attend a group event with no agenda. Get in the room, even if it feels awkward, especially if it feels awkward. Showing up builds a muscle, and muscles grow through repetition. Secondly, learn to tolerate the discomfort of being known. Here's the paradox. We want to be seen, but we also are afraid of it. Because being seen means being vulnerable. It means risking judgments or rejection or indifference. But it also means finally you're being understood. See, growth requires exposure. So start small, but keep going. And then thirdly, build boundaries that protect and don't punish. See, a lot of people, especially those who are healing from rejection, they build walls instead of boundaries. And the walls say, no one is going to get in. But boundaries say, you can come close, but only if it's safe. Boundaries let the right people close while keeping your core intact. And then fourthly, replace fantasy with reality. Many who feel unchosen in life, they imagine perfect relationships. They imagine perfect conversations and perfect rejections. But the real connection is messy and imperfect, and it's slow, and sometimes it can be disappointing. So don't wait for a fantasy version of life to come along. Engage instead in the real thing, warts and all. The messiness is where intimacy lives. So fifthly, I want you to cultivate friendships that don't revolve around utility. Many men are only valued for what they do and not who they are. So look for people who want to know you, not just to use you, but actually get to know you. And here's the hard truth. You may have to be that person first. Offer your presence, offer patience, offer your humanity. And this can be a catalyst or a ripple effect to others. Now, I also wanted to return to that wound, the one that just won't go quiet. That pain of being unchosen does not disappear overnight. It, it may still visit you in the silence. It may still whisper those doubts that we looked at earlier when someone doesn't text back, or when you watch others fall in love like it's effortless and meanwhile you're still single. But the difference now is this. You have a way to respond, not by pretending that you don't care. It's not by blaming others, but it's instead by saying to that wound, I see you and I know you, and you don't define me anymore. Because here's the quiet revolution. Being unwanted doesn't mean that you are unworthy. And being unseen doesn't mean that you aren't radiant. This world doesn't teach men how to feel safe. It doesn't teach boys how to tend to their desire for longing. It teaches performance and suppression. It teaches winning or losing. But what if connection isn't about winning? What if the deepest love begins when we stop trying to earn that love and instead we start building it gently and slowly and honestly? I want us to explore a little bit of what happens when you finally start believing that you're allowed to matter. I want us to talk a little bit about identity after rejection and hope after silence, and how to live a life that refuses to be dictated by those who didn't pick you. Because you were never meant to orbit someone else's absence. You were made to become a force of presence in your own right. And that is where everything shifts experientially. There comes a point when you stop waiting to be picked. And it's not out of bitterness, it's not out of defeat, but it's something inside of you that has woken up and realized that choosing starts with you choosing yourself. This shift is seismic because up until now, your sense of worth may have been tied to someone else's gaze, to someone else's attention, to someone handing you the role of being worthy. But real healing means reclaiming authorship of your own story. It means moving from someone who's waiting to be seen to someone who's ready to live visibly. That doesn't mean that all the pain disappears. The ache of the past, it doesn't just evaporate just because you found a new language or built new practices. No, the pain becomes a part of the landscape, but it's no longer the architect of your life. There's power in being able to say, yes, I've known rejection. Yes, I've often felt overlooked, but I'm not building my future around those moments. Not anymore. You're not the moments that they didn't text back. You are not the date that never happened. Your identity is not the silence of someone else's eyes that passed over you. You are who you choose to become in the face of those very things. So let's talk a little bit about that, shall we? When you've lived a life that's shaped by unchosenness, it's easy to assume that your desires are wrong, that wanting to be loved, to be held, to be cherished is asking too much. So Let's name something as plainly as we can, shall we? You are not too much for wanting connection. You are not too much for wanting softness. You are not too much for wanting to be someone's person. That desire is holy. The mistake isn't wanting to be loved. The mistake is thinking that it only counts if it comes from outside of you. See, you can be the first voice to say, I see you. You can be the first soul to say, you matter here. You can be the first hand to reach inward and offer tenderness to yourself. Self-love is not a replacement for community. It's the soil from which healthy connection grows. Because when you begin to walk through the world rooted in your own dignity, it's then that you stop trying to manipulate connection. It's then that you stop trying to perform and you stop clinging to the people who can't see you. And it's then that you start to attract and allowing the kind of relationships that will actually honor who you are. That's how you become the kind of person who can be chosen, not out of desperation, but out of alignment. So let's not romanticize this process, though, shall we? It's not a linear path. You'll still have days where the wounds speak louder than the truth. You'll still feel the sting of exclusion, perhaps, the doubt when someone doesn't reciprocate, the temptation to spiral back into shame. But now you have a choice. Do you let the moment re-narrate your entire identity, or do you acknowledge that moment and feel it and keep walking forward anyway? The wound may never be fully quiet, but its voice doesn't have to be the loudest one in the room anymore. This is where integrity and intimacy start to converge. Integrity is choosing the actions that align with the truth of your worth, especially when no one else is watching. Intimacy is allowing others to witness your truth without having to shrink or erase yourself. And together, these two build a life that isn't centered on being chosen, but on being real. And from that realness, connection becomes not just possible, it actually becomes quite sustainable. So what do you do with this part of yourself that still is in pain or experiencing pain? While you honor it. You say, I know why you hurt. I know what you were hoping for, and I'm not abandoning you anymore because you're worthwhile. You in essence, parent yourself. You parent yourself the way that no one did. You nurture the belief that you're worth loving. You stop begging for crumbs from others who don't have the capacity to feed themselves. And in doing so, you become the kind of person who has presence in the world that desperately needs that kind of groundedness. You become someone who doesn't weaponize their own wounds against themselves. You become someone who doesn't outsource their sense of worth. You become someone who's not playing the game of invisibility. Not anymore. So much of what breaks us isn't the rejection that we experience. It's instead the story that we tell ourselves about what that rejection meant. It tells us, we tell ourselves that we're unworthy, that we're defective, and that we're inherently forgettable. And you see, that story is the lie that we continue to subscribe to. But the reality is you were not born to be unwanted. You were not made to be an extra in the background of someone else's life. You were not cursed with too much emotion or not enough charm. You are not unlovable. And if no one has said this yet, I want you to hear it from me for the first time. You're allowed to matter. You are allowed to take up space, all the space. You're allowed to heal in public. You're allowed to build a life where you don't have to pretend that you're fine just to be accepted. You don't have to hustle to be worthy. You already are worthy. So the next time that the wound speaks, because it is going to speak, I want you to speak back to it. Speak with a kindness. Speak with an honesty to it. Speak with an authority of someone who has stopped outsourcing their story to rejection and has instead reclaimed their own story for themselves, saying, I am worthwhile. This episode was never about fixing you, because you're not broken. It was instead about offering language to the wound that you've been carrying in silence this whole time. It's about building a bridge between your pain and your desire to feel alive. It was about reminding you that even if you've been unseen, even if you've been unwanted, even if you've been unchosen, you're not alone. And you're not done. We rise not just when others lift us up, we rise when we decide that our story is worth telling. Our story is worth telling out loud, with integrity, with intimacy, with courageousness. And when we rise like that, the wound doesn't go quiet, it goes sacred. I want to say thank you for walking this road with me. It's not an easy one that I'm calling you to. We're just getting started, but you got this.